Hi, my name is Mariam Hassan, and today I'm going to share a story with you that completely transformed my life. This isn't just a story about a near-death experience. It's about the love of God, the search for truth, and the extraordinary power of Jesus Christ. Let me start by saying that I never expected my life to turn out this way. For years, I believed I knew the answers. I followed the teachings of Islam with all my heart, thinking I was on the right path. But everything changed on a cold February morning in 2016. If you're watching this right now, I believe it's because God has something to say to you. So I invite you to stay with me as I recount every detail of what happened. The life I lived before the accident, the moment my world turned upside down, and the journey of faith that followed. I was born in a small village in Morocco, surrounded by rolling hills and olive trees. Life was simple but deeply rooted in tradition and faith. My parents, Jamal and Amina, were devout Muslims who raised my siblings and me to follow the teachings of Islam in every aspect of our lives. One of my earliest memories is of my father teaching me how to recite the Quran. He would sit me on his lap and guide my small hands over the pages as he recited the words aloud. I didn't fully understand what they meant at the time, but I felt a sense of pride in learning something so sacred. My mother, Amina, was the heart of our home. She worked tirelessly to care for our family, cooking meals, sewing clothes, and teaching my sisters and me the values of modesty and obedience. She often said, "Mariam, a good Muslim woman is like a pearl, precious, protected, and hidden from the world's corruption." As a child, I accepted everything I was taught without question. I believed that Islam was the ultimate truth, that Muhammad was the final prophet, and that following the 5 pillars of Islam would secure my place in paradise. But as I grew older, questions began to creep into my mind. One day, when I was about 10 years old, I asked my father why Allah would need us to pray exactly 5 times a day. Wouldn't a single heartfelt prayer be enough? My father's expression grew stern. "Mariam, it is not our place to question Allah's commands. Faith means submission." His answer silenced me, but it didn't satisfy me. Over the years, more questions arose. Why were women's rights so limited in Islam? Why did the Quran allow men to have multiple wives but not women? And most troubling of all, how could a loving God condemn good people, people who showed kindness and compassion, to hell simply because they weren't Muslim? I buried these questions deep inside me, afraid of what they might mean. When I turned 22, I married my husband Farid in a traditional Moroccan ceremony. Farid was kind, hardworking, and deeply committed to his faith. Together, we decided to start a new life in Aspen, Colorado, where Farid's cousin had established a small business. The transition to life in America was both exciting and challenging. We opened a Moroccan restaurant called Aisha's Cafe, which quickly became a gathering place for the local Muslim community. Farid and I were blessed with 3 children, our eldest daughter Layla, who recently made us grandparents, our son Idris, who was preparing for law school, and our youngest daughter Amina, who had a passion for art and dreamed of becoming an illustrator. On the surface, my life seemed perfect. I was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a respected member of my community. But deep down, those old questions continued to haunt me. February 23rd, 2016, began like any other day. The sky was clear, the snow-covered peaks of Aspen glistened under the sunlight, and the air was crisp and cool. My husband had already left for the mosque, and I was preparing for a solo ski trip. Skiing had become my sanctuary, a way to clear my mind and reconnect with what I thought was Allah's creation. As I packed my gear, my son Idris approached me. He had been asking questions about Islam for months, and I could tell he was struggling to reconcile what he had been taught with what he was beginning to feel in his heart. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "how do we know Islam is the only truth?" What if there's more to God than what we've been taught? His words stopped me in my tracks. I turned to him and said firmly, Idris, Islam is the final revelation. Muhammad is the last prophet, and the Quran is perfect. There's no need to question what Allah has made clear. But as I said those words, I felt a pang of doubt in my own heart. I had spent my entire life avoiding these questions, and now my son was asking them aloud. As I drove to the ski resort, his words echoed in my mind. What if there was more to God than what I had been taught? What if I was wrong? The first part of my ski run was peaceful. The snow crunched beneath my skis, the cold air brushed against my face, and the rhythm of the turns felt natural and calming. I loved the solitude of skiing. It was one of the few times I felt truly alone with my thoughts. But as I approached a steep section of the slope, something felt off. The snow beneath me seemed unstable, and I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide whether to continue. Before I could make a decision, the ground gave way beneath me. The next few seconds were a blur. I remember the sensation of falling, the sharp pain as I struck a rock, and the terrifying realization that I couldn't stop myself. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the blue sky above me, framed by the tops of the trees. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my body. I was floating above the scene, watching as skiers rushed to help me. I could see my broken body lying in the snow motionless, and the sight was both surreal and heartbreaking. I should have felt fear or panic, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. There was no pain, no anxiety, just calm. Then I felt a pull. It wasn't a physical force, but a gentle, irresistible energy drawing me away from the scene. I turned toward the source and saw a light in the distance. As I turned toward the light, I felt an irresistible pull, like a gentle force was drawing me closer. The light was unlike anything I had ever seen. Radiant, warm, and alive. It wasn't just brightness, it had depth and presence. I felt as though the light knew me, as if it were calling my name with a love so profound that I could feel it resonating in every part of my being. The closer I got, the more the world I had left behind seemed to fade away. The cold snow, the pain of the accident, even the faces of the people trying to save me, they all became distant. All that mattered was the light ahead. As I moved toward it, I entered a tunnel filled with vibrant colors that shimmered and danced. Golds, purples, and blues surrounded me, and they seemed to pulse in harmony with a melody that wasn't music in the traditional sense. It was a sound that spoke directly to my soul, a song of love, peace, and belonging. The further I went, the more weightless I felt. It was as if every burden, every worry, and every doubt I had ever carried was being stripped away. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. I thought to myself, this must be paradise. This is what I've been striving for my entire life. But as I neared the end of the tunnel, everything changed. The warm, vibrant colors faded, and I found myself standing at the edge of a barren, desolate landscape. The ground beneath me was cracked and scorched, and the air was thick with smoke. In the distance, I saw flames rising high into the sky, casting eerie shadows across the ground. The heat was intense, but it didn't touch me. I could feel it, sense it, but I wasn't harmed by it. Then I heard the sound, a chorus of cries and wails that sent shivers through me. It was the sound of anguish, of souls in torment. And that's when I saw him. In the middle of the flames stood a figure. At first, I couldn't make out who it was, but as I moved closer, recognition struck me like a lightning bolt. It was Muhammad. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. Muhammad, the prophet I had revered my entire life, the man I believed was the final messenger of God, was standing in the flames, his face twisted in anguish. He cried out, "I was deceived and I deceived others." His voice was filled with sorrow and regret, and his words echoed in my mind, shaking the very foundation of everything I believed. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. This was the man I had spent my life following, the one whose teachings I had built my identity around. How could he be here? How could this be his fate? I felt a mix of emotions, confusion, fear, and a deep sadness. If Muhammad wasn't in paradise, what did that mean for me? For my family? For the billions of people who followed his teachings? As I stood there, overwhelmed by the scene before me, a brilliant light appeared behind me. It was even more radiant than the light I had seen in the tunnel, and it seemed to push back the darkness and the flames. I turned, and in the center of the light stood Jesus Christ. He wasn't just a figure of light. He was real, tangible, and alive. His presence was overwhelming, yet comforting. He radiated a love so pure, so unconditional, that it brought me to my knees. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I could only look at him, feeling the weight of his gaze. His eyes were filled with compassion, understanding, and a depth of love that I had never known. He smiled at me and said, "Miriam, you are loved. You always have been, and you always will be." Before I could respond, he reached out his hand, and suddenly, my entire life flashed before me. It wasn't like watching a movie. It was as if I were reliving each moment, feeling the emotions I had felt at the time, but also experiencing how my actions had impacted others. I saw myself as a child, helping my younger sister learn her Quranic verses. At the time, it felt like a chore, but Jesus showed me how that small act of patience had brought joy to her and strengthened our bond. I saw myself comforting a friend who had lost her husband. I could feel the warmth of her gratitude and how much that moment had meant to her. But then I saw the moments I wasn't proud of. I saw myself judging a neighbor for not following Islamic customs, and I felt the sting of her hurt as if it were my own. One of the hardest moments to relive was an argument with Idris. He had come to me with questions about Islam, and instead of listening, I had dismissed him harshly. I saw how my words had crushed him and pushed him further away. Through it all, Jesus stood by my side. He didn't condemn me or make me feel ashamed. Instead, he gently helped me understand the consequences of my actions and showed me how much every choice, no matter how small, mattered. After the life review, Jesus began to reveal truths that I was not prepared to hear. He showed me visions of Muhammad's life, not the idealized version I had grown up with, but the reality. I saw how Muhammad had been deceived by dark spiritual forces, how his revelations had been influenced by these forces to create a religion that mixed elements of truth with falsehood. I was shown how Islam had been used to control and manipulate people, keeping them from knowing the true nature of God. It was a system that demanded obedience, but offered no assurance of salvation. Jesus explained that while many Muslims are sincere in their faith, they are searching for God in a system that cannot lead them to Him. Salvation doesn't come through rituals or works. It comes through a relationship with Him. Finally, Jesus turned to me and said, "Miriam, you have seen the truth. Now you must go back and share it." His words filled me with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Gratitude because I had been given a second chance, and fear because I knew how difficult it would be to share this message. I pleaded with him, "Please let me stay with you. I don't want to go back." But he smiled gently and said, "I will always be with you. But there are people who need to hear your story. Through you, they will come to know me." His words gave me the strength to accept what I had to do. The moment I returned to my body was jarring. One moment I was standing in the radiant presence of Jesus, surrounded by His love and peace. The next, I was thrust back into the broken shell of my physical body. The first thing I felt was pain, sharp, searing pain radiating through every part of me. My chest felt as if it were being crushed, my legs were heavy, and every breath was a struggle. For a moment, I thought I wouldn't survive the ordeal of simply being alive again. I opened my eyes to see bright fluorescent lights above me and blurry figures moving around. It took a moment for my senses to adjust, but I could hear voices, urgent, frantic voices. One of them said, "We've got a pulse." I realized I was in the back of an ambulance. The paramedics were working tirelessly to keep me stable. I wanted to tell them what I had just experienced, but I couldn't speak. All I could do was lie there, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just happened. When I finally regained full consciousness, I was in a hospital room. Machines beeped steadily around me, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. I felt weak and disoriented, but my mind was racing with thoughts of what I had seen and heard during my near-death experience. My husband, Farid, was sitting by my bedside. His face was pale, and his eyes were red from crying. When he saw that I was awake, relief washed over him. He grabbed my hand and said, "Alhamdulillah, you're alive." I wanted to tell him everything about the tunnel, the light, the vision of Muhammad, and my encounter with Jesus. But the words wouldn't come. How could I explain something so profound, so life-changing, in a way that he would understand? Instead, I simply nodded, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. As I lay in that hospital bed, I replayed every moment of the experience in my mind. The tunnel of light, the fiery vision of Muhammad, the life review, and the words Jesus spoke to me. They were as vivid as if they had just happened. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jesus had shown me about Islam. The realization that the religion I had followed my entire life was not what I thought it was left me feeling unmoored, as if the ground beneath me had crumbled. At the same time, I felt an unshakable sense of peace. Jesus' words echoed in my mind. "You are loved. You always have been, and you always will be." Those words became my anchor, reminding me that I wasn't alone, even as I faced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The first person I shared my story with was my son Idris. He had been asking questions about Islam for months, and I felt he was the only one who might understand. When he came to visit me in the hospital, I took his hand and said, "Idris, I need to tell you something." I recounted every detail of my experience: the accident, the out-of-body sensation, the tunnel of light, and my encounter with Jesus. I told him about the fiery vision of Muhammad and the truths Jesus revealed to me about Islam. As I spoke, tears streamed down his face. When I finished, he looked at me with a mix of awe and relief and said, "Mom, I've always felt there was something more. Thank you for telling me." His response gave me the courage to share my story with others, but it also marked the beginning of a difficult journey. Sharing my experience with Farid was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I knew how deeply he was rooted in his faith and how much he valued our identity as a Muslim family. One evening, as we sat together in my hospital room, I said, "Farid, there's something I need to tell you about what happened to me." I spoke slowly, carefully choosing my words as I described the accident, the tunnel of light, and my encounter with Jesus. I told him about the vision of Muhammad and the truths Jesus had revealed to me about Islam. When I finished, Farid was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "Maryam, you must have been confused. You were in pain. You were near death. It's natural for the mind to imagine things." I tried to explain that it wasn't confusion or imagination, but something real and undeniable. But the more I spoke, the more defensive he became. "You're my wife," he said, "and I love you. But you can't turn your back on Islam. Our faith is who we are." His words broke my heart. I knew he couldn't accept what I was telling him, but I also knew I couldn't deny the truth of what I had experienced. As I began to share my story with others, I faced rejection from nearly everyone I knew. Friends who had once been like family stopped speaking to me. Our restaurant, Aisha's Cafe, lost customers, and whispers of betrayal spread through the community. The hardest rejection came from Farid. Over time, the strain between us grew unbearable. He accused me of betraying our family, our faith, and everything we had built together. Eventually, he packed his bags and left. Losing him was devastating, but even in the midst of that pain, I felt a deep sense of peace. I knew that Jesus was with me, guiding me through every trial. In the years since my near-death experience, my life has taken a completely different path. I've embraced Christianity and dedicated my life to sharing the love and truth I encountered during my time with Jesus. I've spoken at churches, written about my experience, and mentored others who are searching for God. Each time I share my story, I feel His presence, reminding me that my purpose is to help others find the same love and truth that transformed my life. Thank you for listening to my story. If it has touched your heart, I encourage you to seek the truth for yourself. Pray, ask questions, and open your heart to God's love. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to this channel for more testimonies like mine. Remember, you are loved, and your life has a purpose. God bless you.